The chatter of expensive suits and designer dresses filled the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers scattering golden light across the guests. The string quartet played softly, trying to drown out the rising hum of confusion. A few whispers had already begun to ripple through the rows of white chairs. Where was the bride? The aisle, lined with orchids and candles, remained empty far too long. At the altar, the millionaire stood rigid, his jaw clenched beneath a mask of composure. His tailored tuxedo fit perfectly, but no amount of perfection could hide the storm in his eyes. A bead of sweat traced down his temple as he glanced toward the doors again. His groomsmen shifted uncomfortably, the officiant cleared his throat. Finally, a wedding planner scurried up to him, whispering something that made his face go pale. The bride was gone, vanished. A car had been seen leaving the back entrance minutes ago. A few guests gasped audibly, others leaned closer, hungry for gossip. Someone in the crowd raised their phone, already typing out the scandal for social media. The millionaire's empire had always rested on more than wealth. It thrived on image, reputation, and the illusion of control. And now, before his investors, rivals, and the press, he was a man abandoned at the altar. The humiliation was unbearable. His eyes scanned the crowd desperately, as though searching for an escape hatch. That's when he saw her. A woman in a modest dress, sitting at the far end of the aisle near the catering staff. She wasn't dressed for attention. Her hair pulled back simply, her hands folded nervously in her lap. She seemed out of place among the glittering crowd, almost as if she didn't belong. But at that moment, something in her calm, startled gaze struck him like lightning. He moved suddenly, stepping down from the altar, ignoring the murmurs that followed. The room seemed to hold its breath as he walked toward her. She sat up straighter, unsure why the groom himself was approaching. When he stopped before her, his voice was low but urgent, carrying the weight of desperation and command. "Be my bride," he said. "Right now. Save me from this." Her lips parted in shock, her pulse hammering. This couldn't be real, yet the intensity in his eyes left no room for doubt. The world around her blurred as the millionaire pulled her gently but firmly to her feet. Gasps rippled through the room, and the quartet faltered mid-note before the violinists hastily picked up again. She stumbled slightly, her modest shoes clicking against the marble floor as he guided her down the aisle. Every step felt unreal, as though she had wandered into someone else's dream, or nightmare. The officiant's eyes darted nervously between the groom and the woman now at his side. The whispers from the guests grew louder, a tide of disbelief and speculation crashing against the fragile silence of the ceremony. A socialite in the front row covered her mouth with gloved hands. A photographer's flash burst like lightning. "Just follow my lead," the millionaire murmured, his voice low, steady, commanding. His hand pressed reassuringly against hers, though his pulse betrayed him, fast, hard, restless. She tried to steady her breathing, her throat dry, her heart pounding so loud she thought everyone must hear it. The officiant cleared his throat and, after a moment's hesitation, continued as though this madness were perfectly rehearsed. The words floated in the air, formal and unwavering, yet they seemed foreign to her ears. She wasn't meant to be here. She wasn't wearing the satin gown, the diamonds, the veil. And yet, with trembling fingers, she accepted the bouquet handed to her by a bewildered bridesmaid. When the vows began, she struggled to form words. The millionaire squeezed her hand, his eyes locked onto hers, feeding her courage she didn't know she possessed. She repeated after the officiant in a shaky voice, each phrase surreal, "to have and to hold, for better or worse." The crowd leaned forward, captivated by the spectacle unfolding before them. Finally, the question hung in the air like a blade: "Do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Her lips trembled. This wasn't her life, her story. And yet, something in his pleading eyes, something raw, almost vulnerable, pushed her past the edge of reason. "I do." A stunned silence followed, broken only by the officiant's final pronouncement. When he said, "You may kiss the bride," the millionaire leaned in. The kiss was brief, calculated for the cameras, yet something electric passed between them, something neither of them expected. The guests erupted into applause, though the sound was tinged with confusion. The press surged forward, eager for photos of the mysterious bride who had appeared out of nowhere. She stood there, dazed, clutching the bouquet as though it anchored her to reality. And in that moment, she realized she wasn't just a witness to someone else's scandal, she was now at the center of it. The honeymoon suite wasn't a place for strangers, yet that's exactly what they were, two people bound by vows spoken under duress. She stood just inside the threshold, her fingers tracing the smooth handle of her small purse, the weight of the day pressing heavily on her chest. The room was lavish, draped in silk and candlelight, but she felt more like a trespasser than a bride. He loosened his tie and poured himself a drink at the minibar, his movements sharp, controlled, as if every gesture was calculated to hold his composure together. For the first time, the mask slipped. His shoulders sagged, and his eyes, no longer hardened for the crowd, revealed exhaustion and something she couldn't quite name, fear. You don't have to be afraid, he said, though the words sounded like they were meant for himself. He handed her a glass of water instead of champagne. This arrangement is temporary. You'll be safe. She took the glass, her voice quiet but edged with disbelief. Safe. I stood in front of hundreds of people, said vows I didn't mean, kissed a man I don't know, and tomorrow I'll be splashed across every headline. That doesn't feel safe. He looked at her then, really looked. She wasn't glittering like the guests at the wedding, nor sculpted by the polish of high society. But she had something else, an honesty that pierced through the lies he lived among. His jaw clenched, as if he were about to speak, but instead he turned away, staring out the wide windows at the city glittering below. It was in the following days that their fragile pact was tested. Paparazzi swarmed outside the mansion gates. Every news outlet demanded to know the identity of the mystery bride. Inside, she tried to navigate a house so large it felt like a labyrinth, trailed by staff who whispered curiously behind her back. At first, she thought the millionaire barely noticed her, too consumed with damage control and meetings behind closed doors. But slowly, she began to see fragments of the man beneath the armor, how he rubbed his temples after tense phone calls, how he lingered in the library at night, staring at an old photograph of his late parents, how he never actually touched the extravagant dinners laid out for him. And then came the discovery. One evening, searching for something to read, she stumbled into his study. Papers littered the desk, contracts, financial statements, threatening letters from competitors. But tucked beneath them was something far more shocking. A letter from the runaway bride, her handwriting frantic, warning him to walk away. Before it was too late. Her breath caught. The runaway hadn't left him for cold feet. She'd left because she was scared, scared of something bigger than either of them. And now, she was part of it. The gala was supposed to be a display of strength, a carefully staged event to reassure investors that the millionaire's empire hadn't cracked under scandal. The ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers and polished marble, filled with men in tailored suits and women draped in jewels. Cameras flashed as the newlyweds descended the staircase together, her arm tucked in his. To the world, they looked like a power couple, radiant and unshaken. But underneath her calm smile, her chest tightened with the weight of what she had discovered. And then, as if the night wasn't already straining under secrets, the runaway bride appeared. She swept into the room like a ghost from the past, elegant, icy, alive with fury. The crowd gasped, and the flashbulbs turned instantly toward her. She didn't hesitate, didn't falter, her voice cut through the music like a blade. He doesn't belong to her, she declared, eyes locked on the millionaire. I was forced to run, but I won't stay silent any longer. Do you know who you've married? The room erupted into whispers. Some gasped, others leaned forward hungrily, desperate for scandal. The stand-in bride felt the ground tilt beneath her, her fingers clutching the bouquet she still carried out of habit. The millionaire stiffened beside her, his mask wavering as tension knotted his jaw. You left me, he shot back, his voice low but shaking with restrained anger. You abandoned me in front of everyone. Her laugh was bitter, sharp. I left because I was warned. Because the moment I stood beside you, I became a target. And now she pointed to the woman at his side, has taken my place in the crosshairs. Every eye turned to the stand-in bride. For a heartbeat, she felt exposed, small, utterly out of place in this glittering cage of wealth and secrets. But then she lifted her chin, meeting the runaway's glare, meeting the crowd's hungry stares. Her voice didn't shake when she said, maybe I wasn't meant to be here. But I stayed. When the world laughed, I stood by him. Whatever storm this is, I'll face it. Not for money, not for reputation, but because he isn't alone anymore. The room stilled. Even the runaway bride faltered, her lips pressing together as if struck by the sincerity of the words. The millionaire turned to her then, something breaking in his expression. Vulnerability softened the steel of his gaze. Slowly, deliberately, he took her hands in his. I don't care what they think, he said, his voice carrying through the hall. This time, I choose my bride. And I choose you. The declaration rang louder than any scandal. The cameras flashed wildly, the investors whispered, the rivals seethed. But in that instant, it didn't matter. In front of the world, the woman who had once been a desperate stand-in was no longer temporary. She was his bride by choice, bound not by circumstance, but by love. And as the music swelled and the ballroom erupted into a storm of noise, she realized her life would never, ever be the same.